Hello and welcome to this month's painting tutorial. This month I had a question on how to paint realistic flesh, and it reminded me that we haven't painted any figures for a while. So today that's what we're going to cover in our lesson. And there are two different ways that you can go about painting flesh. You can either layer the colors or you can put them down pre-mixed. So let me show you the difference, because layering the colors really is a lot more effective. But you almost have to see it to believe it. So start with a mixture of alizarin crimson and raw sienna, and then I'm going to paint that in this first board here. So you can see that this is a typical light-skinned flesh tone. And it's decent, but there's nothing very exciting about it. So now, in this second square, start with some cerulean blue and paint that down. On top of that, I'm going to paint a crazy pink. Opera Rose, this is called. Then maybe I'll paint some ultramarine blue, make it a little bit more purple. Then I'll throw on some green, sap green. But now let's add some raw sienna. So we're getting a yellowish tone in there. And then over the top, I'll go straight alizarin crimson. Zoink, zoink, zoink. I can even add a little bit more red. Okay, it got a little bit darker, but it still is going to read as flesh tone, and it's way more interesting than this, which almost looks like a label of soup or something. Really nothing going on there at all. Now let's do the same thing with dark skin. To make the skin darker, all I'm going to do is make that raw sienna alizarin crimson mix, but add some ultramarine blue and some burnt umber. I'll make that pre-mixed color up top here. Then down below, I'll show you how it can look different with layering colors. So let's start with cerulean blue again. And then add, that raw sienna on top of that. Then I'll add some alizarin crimson. And there we have the same basic color, but with a lot more life to it. You can end it with another layer of blue if you want that to be the predominant, or burnt umber. But either way, by layering the colors on top of each other, you get so much more going on in the flesh tone than just this flat, flat. You see the difference? Interesting, interesting, boring, dull. Alright? Now that we know the principle of layering colors to make a flesh tone, let's apply that to a couple of portraits of different people. I have them drawn on some watercolor paper with the highlights protected, which is an important part because you're going to do a lot of just pure color coverage here. So notice I have the whites of the eyes and the highlights protected, and the teeth on her. He's looking down so you can't see that much, but there's highlights, there's highlight here, and there's highlight here, and that's all protected with masking fluid. It's dry, and now we can start painting. So I'm going to keep my reference material close. I'm going to start with a large flat, get it wet, and then in order to maintain a bit of control, I'm going to start by just painting clean water over the top of his hair and his skin tone. The water is going to make the paint flow together and make interesting effects, but it's also going to discourage the paint from going into the dry portions of the paper. Now you can see a little bit of shine to the paper to show you that it's wet, but it's not buckling and it's not sopping wet. That is perfect. Start with your cerulean blue and paint right over the top. I'm painting over the hair and the skin in the same pass. Here the color is a little darker. I don't want it to be that dark. It's really easy on this technique to make your colors too opaque, and then you wind up with mud. And it's ugly. So keep it light, keep it fresh, and keep your washes fairly wet. Rinse out your brush, squeegee it off so you have the excess water out of there, and then let's go in with a cobalt violet. And again, my layers are still very transparent. I can still see the pencil lines underneath even 2 coats of paint here. Rinse, squeegee, go in with your green. And it's starting to look a little puddly, going gray. So finally, we have to add some reds over the top of this. So let's go in with our alizarin crimson. Alizarin crimson is a really strong staining color. So make sure that it's fully activated and you don't get ugly red streaks. Right over the top and see how that makes purple. I'm adding my yellow to the skin tone last of all. This is raw sienna. The last thing I could possibly do is add just a little bit more red in some of the shadow areas of the face. But then that's it, because my paper's starting to warp like this, and that's going to start catching the water. So while that's drying, let's move forward and do the same thing to our dark-skinned girl. I'm going to paint her with water first, and then dark or light-skinned, I still start with a blue in either case. And I'm focusing on her shadow shapes because they're more visible. There's a highlight here, there's a highlight here, and here. So I'm painting with those in mind from the very beginning. Then some purple again. I can work right over the eye because I have those highlights protected, so that's wonderful. And remember, the sides of the face need to be in shadow so that they can retreat back and make it look round. Then I'll add some red. And some burnt umber mixed with some sienna so that I have a darker tone, but it's also a little bit yellow. Let's see how I'm still linking up those shadow shapes. Not everything has the same coverage, and so in places it's going to show more red through, in other places more blue, in other places more yellow, and that is all going to come together to add a lot more interest and depth to the finished portrait. So then I might want just a little bit more blue and brown. This is really strong, so I'm going to focus it on the darkest parts of the face, like the neck and the parts of the head that are the farthest back. If I want, I can go in with just a hint more red here and there, and then I need to let it rest, regain the tooth of the paper so that it can hold some more color, and go back at it. So this is where we stop. Now that the first layer is dried, we can go back in and add some more details and colors to these faces. And I'm going to clean up any areas that I think need a bit of touch-up. Let's add a little more sienna to the cheek area here and work on defining those ears and the area around the ears. Get some more shapes going. And I'm just using the large brush so that I don't choke up too much and try to add too much detail at this point because it's still about getting the colors. So as I work, I'm squinting at the piece and looking for shapes of shadow and color. There's a triangle of light that falls on the cheek, and then the darkness comes under the eye. Put that in shadow. And the interior of the ear is going to wind up being a lot darker by the time we're finished with it, but I'm just going to put down some of those negative shapes on the inside really quickly to keep them from getting washed away altogether. And then in the shadow portions, I'm going to go in with that cobalt violet and add just a smidge of some shading in the darkest areas here and there before it has a chance to dry. So I'm just accenting some of the darker areas. This is a large brush. I'm working fairly quickly and focusing on seeing those shadow shapes. I'm liking that. So let's not kill it. Let's just let it lie. Do that same sort of step on the girl. So I'm using a darker color, it's a little too intense. And I'm just bringing out some of those shadow shapes. And I don't want the color to be so thick though that it's covering up all the hard work, those interesting colors that we developed underneath. So I'm going back now with a more transparent wash of the same color. See, and then before it has a chance to dry completely, I touch in with a different color, like a blue, and help that to stay interesting. But here again though, I'm focusing on the shadow shapes of the face. And yes, it looks weird at this point. So it's the same process as before, but now I'm making smaller shapes. You start with large shapes. In fact, it was nearly covering everything to begin with. And now we're paring down, bringing it into the smaller shapes and doing the same sort of color blending. So let me just soften a few of these shapes. I'm just using clean water and rubbing gently on this still damp color with my flat brush to get these blended together. And then I'm going to let it dry a second time. Now we're in a better place, so I'm going to add some of the darks to the face and to the hair. So let's start with that hair, and then even here I don't want to cover up all of that interesting color. So I'm just going to use the corner of the brush, and I'm going to add it in strokes like this, so that there's still some of the underlying color peeking through. And then of course, while that color is still wet, you can go back in with some more colors and give it a little bit more variation on this upper layer. I'll add some reds and of course some darks. And I'm developing the outer shape, and then I can fill in up above those more quickly. Then for the smallest hairs, you can get a rigger brush, and you can either paint those with the bristles if they're fine enough, or you can flip the brush over and drag some little strokes through with the handle. Then I'll add a little bit of shading to the eye, some eyelashes, a little bit of the dark under the nose, and then some detail in the mouth. So I'm just using the hair tone here and adding some darks where they need to go in the rest of the face. And I'll accent this line here that shows that he's craning his neck. So just try to let it lie as much as possible. Let your shapes lie. Let's do similar work in the girl now and do the same thing. So once you have the wet layer in place like this, go back into it with maybe some really wild colors. Like here's an opera rose. I'll let that mix in with the dark and become a new color on the page. And here at this edge of the face, the shadow goes right from the hair into the face. So I'm going to re-add that and bring it right down, all the way down the cheek the way I see it in the picture. And then that dark shape is on the nose, above the lips, and on the bottom of the cheek on this side as well. So it's one big shadow shape that should be connected from one piece to the next. And I'll put down a raw sienna on my brush, and then I'm using that overlay to blend what I have down on the paper already. Now one thing, I didn't leave this highlight enough right above her eyebrow, so I'm just going to blot that out while the color is still fresh and a little bit damp. I'll do that on this side as well. Okay, but then I'm going to let that dry, remove the masking fluid. Okay, when the shadow layers have dried, remove that masking fluid. The easiest way is by using a rubber cement eraser like this. Then you just need to soften up those shadow shapes a little bit. Do that with an angled shader that you get damp. And then just rub over the top of those highlights. And if the color is still fresh, even though it's dry, it's still going to blend in just a little bit. Then we need to fill in the shirt a little bit. I'm going to make it a red shirt. So just go carefully up to the edge of the face and fill that shirt in. All those lines have masking fluid, so they should stay nice and precise. The shirt is just like everything else. It works better to have more than one color on the surface. So here I'll add in some oranges and some shadow under the collar. And that is just that easy. While I still have the red on my brush, I'll go back into the hair, fill in some of those lines that look a little bit too strong. And then with a clean brush, I'll blend them out. And then once the shirt is dry, I can remove that masking fluid and he'll be pretty close to done. Let's bring our girl up to that same level. We'll go in here and just add a little bit of color. Add a little red in there on that side. Go in with some shadow purples just by adding some blue here and there. Then I can work on her face. Let's put some more definition in her eyes. Now I'm adding some lip color. This is the process of painting flesh tone, and the only thing left is to finish up the final details in the face in that same way. So let me finish that up off camera, and I'll come back to you one last time to show you the final portraits. Alright, here are the portraits after I've pushed them forward a little bit more. So painting flesh really is just a matter of layering interesting colors and letting them mix on the page. So painting flesh is challenging, but it's a lot of fun, and it's definitely worthwhile to practice on different shades of flesh and working from color and black and white reference photos. So that concludes this month's drawing tutorial. I'll upload this material so that you can practice on these two kids if you want. Otherwise, there's plenty of faces that need painting in this world, so go to it and find something that appeals to you. Thanks so much for watching.